Issue 245, Endangered Species Part 3. We see narration that the Albion government was too confident in their defenses to heed the warning from Thair's wife. We see that she had told the wandering tribe from earlier to follow her out of Albion, and the narration says that she's the reason there were any survivors. I love that this was explained. I always assumed nobody in the wandering tribe survived when Eggman attacked Albion. Now it makes sense that they were told to go there because it didn't get them all killed. Still don't understand why Finaivis had that happen. Oh, but Yannard didn't survive. Everyone else from the wandering tribe trusted her and left, but he didn't. The guy who actually has a name. Despite her efforts, a lot of her former tribe still perished that day. That's depressing, but at least some survived. Then as I'm wondering why the story didn't start with us seeing what Sonic was doing, we see Aurora tell Thair to stop caring about his old loved ones, but at least she has a point that just caused them heartache. She says their focus should be on ensuring their third member is prepared for Ascension. What, Tails' uncle? That was stupid and unnecessary, by the way. No one's explaining why it's considered necessary and useful for Aurora, when he'd be far more useful on Mobius. And she worked perfectly fine without him. Thair sets up to Knuckles now, and finally we see Knuckles ask Thrash what he's doing here, and his mother's glad to see him. Knuckles gestures at her to keep her from going up to him, which he isn't happy with, but it makes sense because it's not the right time. Because Linda is a villain, she asks what those things are doing here, and she's referring to Thrash's devil dogs. He says that below the city is a gene bomb the Echidnas had made in the past, apparently. He wants it to detonate to give the Echidnas a taste of what they did to its people. They'll all become beasts. Why would there be a second gene bomb already built for them to just conveniently take advantage of? The Echidnas made one to deal with their enemies and they used it. I guess this can make sense if they made one in case they'd have to deal with the race of Mobian, making them waste resources warring with them. And they just never felt like using it. If they turned people into devil dogs, then this makes sense too. At first I assumed that because he mentioned gene bomb, that it revealed that gene bombs are why they became beasts in the first place. Lee tells Remington to start evacuating Albion. Tails wonders if Thrash would get affected by the gene bomb too. Thrash thanks him for the concern, even if he is smirking, and says the gene bomb's been calibrated with the Echidna DNA, so it'll only affect them. Who calibrated it with it though? He's not a genius programmer or scientist, and Finaivis hates him. He never worked for Thrash. So I'm guessing the gene bomb had such great user interface that all Thrash had to do was put Echidna DNA in it for it to calibrate to that. So he didn't have to reprogram it. He says that all he has to do is keep the Echidnas from leaving. But he's just one person with a few devil dogs. Also, I guess the range on the gene bomb sucks and can't extend a lot further, so that it wouldn't matter if they ran out of the city. He roars, and I like that Sonic still has the composure to say he didn't hear that and ask him to speak up, before satisfyingly spin dashing at him. And I guess he hit him feet first, and that's why his spines didn't cut him and go through him. Amy says Team Fighters is gonna back Sonic up, and Julie says to get everyone out of the city in the meantime. Leonida doesn't think Thrash would be able to succeed. She's right. Remington tells Leonida not to underestimate another threat. It's nice of him to put his hand on her shoulder, even if she doesn't deserve it. So Remington wants all of the Echidnas to cooperate, and Charming's Beyonce says while flying that she'll make sure everyone will play nice. She gets thanked and smartly told to keep the communications open just in case. Knuckles says he shouldn't be too surprised to see Thrash here. This would only make sense if he was referencing the fact that Thrash sarcastically said to his face that it'd be a shame if Echidnas went extinct. Thrash says that he's always willing to help out freedom fighters, and Julie asks what Echidnas ever did to him, even though he already told them what they did. But to be fair, he wasn't mutated, but it did upset him. He catches Sonic's spin dash, making me wonder why he doesn't get sent backwards a lot from the momentum and crash. And he throws him, saying that he'd prefer not to fight with him. Julie gets told to look out, and Amy attacks one of the devil dogs that was just behind her. And she says she's come a long way since she gave her some training she had long since proved she didn't need when she fought that SWAT bot army. And this is the last time our training of her will be referenced, so whatever. Most of the time they still never interact. Then Linda tells Remington that cybernetics were used in Albion to help people hurt from the wars. And that's why Medicare knew what they could do for everyone else. She somehow expects me to believe that without cybernetics you'd never survive in the Twilight Zone. Even though Knuckles survived it perfectly fine with no problem. She must mean in the long run. But since she doesn't explain exactly what she means, I don't care. Of all the different other universes that could have been picked for a place to banish the Dark Legion, why did the magic of the First Guardian insist on choosing the Twilight Zone when they'd need cybernetics to survive it? It's far more likely that they would have been sent anywhere else then, because he's not needlessly cruel. Then someone says that she wouldn't have survived giving birth without Legion medical technology. She could have just had a C-section. She says they can all live longer, healthier lives thanks to them. Too bad they have bombs. Because otherwise, those are great points and I'm glad they're being addressed. Remington says he never objected to cybernetics in general, just to them being forced on people. Linda says people would realize their benefits after the Legion would take over their city. Never mind that it wouldn't be worth being ruled by them. Remington calls her out on being inconsiderate and controlling, and she says that now he knows how the Legion felt when the Council banned technology. Then a noise is heard, and a cyborg is asked if she sees anything. She warns them all of the devil dogs that have them surrounded. Remington tells the soldiers to set their blasters to stun, and then he says that when Enerjack Knuckles destroyed his memory neutralizing chip, he got some memories of his childhood back. Never mind that there was never any indication that he had ever been in the Twilight Zone before, and obviously if he had come from there, Echidna Paulus would have noticed that he came there out of nowhere with no papers and records and education. So why would he have been hired as a constable? He just came there as a kid? He says he remembered how hard it was for his mother to live in the Twilight Cage, and how much Leonda terrorized her, forcing her to leave. But he's too vague about why it was hard. I'm just confused and not respecting it because there's no indication that he was from the Twilight Cage when he first showed up. Remington knows because of his mother that Leonda must have killed Luger, so why is she bothering to deny it? She's got absolute authority, and her people are brainwashed into obedience to her by their cybernetics. Naturally, Lara tells him to stop arguing for now and fight the devil dogs. Saffron explains what's happening and gets told that help is on the way, so Julie tells Sonic about this, and Knuckles tells Sonic to go help them. Then Thrash finally explains why Julie's warp ring isn't working. It's in the Gene Bomb's energy field. Well, how convenient for him that when those ancient Albion scientists made the Gene Bomb, its energy fields turned out to make the creation of portals in space-time impossible before warp rings were invented. I'm just relieved to finally get an explanation, but it just seems so unlikely. It's a Gene Bomb, not an anti-portal field. Those are two different functions, and you'd think you couldn't make this happen by accident. Knuckles is calm enough to ask Thrash how his family turned out this way. It's nice that he does this and they take a break from fighting non-stop. Thrash says that when the Echidnas came to Down Under, the Tasmanian Devils were like lab rats to them and were taken and changed, and the Echidnas wanted to fight their enemies and his people were used for that end. I always assumed the Tasmanian Devils were their enemies to begin with, so their wars with them caused them to do this. Wasn't that explained? Why did the Echidnas go to such convoluted lengths to fight their enemies this way instead of simply sending soldiers and robots to fight their wars? So I'm not satisfied with his explanation. It just feels like he's intentionally leaving out how it all started when that's what he was asked. He says he used that warp ring to find papers saying where the Echidnas were all hiding. Papers in Angel Island mentioning that Echidnas lived on Albion at some point in history, I guess. Because there wouldn't be any papers mentioning that more of them were sent there. Only Knuckles would write that. Then after Saffron gets shot out of the sky, she puts her hand up to a devil dog instead of running away or anything because she's too panicked. And it's very lucky for her that it licked her hand when it was nothing but mean looking before. Knuckles tells Thrash that none of them were aware that Echidna settled in Down Under more than once, and apologizes for what happened to his people. He calls them out, and the ground below them cracks open into a hole. Why? Thankfully, Thrash falls into it with the rest of them. Knuckles catches Julie while gliding, and I like that he smiles, asking if she's alright, and she smiles back. I don't know why his landings would need work after years of experience. And Thrash simply lands on the rocky floor. Logically, that'd kill him, or at least injure him. I have to assume he had rings protecting him, and that both of them assume this as well. So that's why they don't even consider that he might be hurt. She tells Knuckles he might want to see this as they're in a dark underground cave. Too bad the story ends here, because I don't know what she's talking about. What, is this Vanitas' place? The plot doesn't really progress in this issue, beyond Sonic getting told to go help the echidnas when they're being attacked by devil dogs. At least I know there's a ton of them, so Thrash has a reason to think he'd actually get to keep the echidnas from leaving Albion. And it's good that it was finally explained that the Gene Bomb's energy field as it's getting ready to work makes the warp rings useless. It's still very confusing because the warp ring was invented by Vanitas recently, and you'd think you'd have to intentionally program a Gene Bomb to also have the secondary function of preventing portals from showing up from a device that wasn't invented yet. I like that it was pointed out that cybernetics are good for people, but for the most part it was just a story where nothing happened that mattered, until Knuckles fell into a hole, and it ends there before things could start happening. And I just don't take seriously the retcon that the Tasmanian Devils weren't already enemies with the echidnas for a while before being mutated as revenge. Instead, they just did it to them for no reason to fight other enemies we don't even know about. They had no reason to do that when they could just keep fighting wars the way they always did. And since the echidnas had the best technology in the world, why would they go to extremes against their enemies when they'd know they'd always be guaranteed to win? If they're gonna go to extremes, they just drop atomic bombs, not go through all of this trouble to make what's essentially just less intelligent ground troops. It's not even like they have super strength or powers.